I suppose I should try to explain what this being is, this entity, this knowledge, this energy that I keep referring to. This will probably come first, but there will be 3 recordings to follow that I actually recorded first. Okay, so I don't know if I can explain this right now. I might just have to leave it pretty open-ended, but the broadest, easiest way to explain it is one dimension is a single, undefinable point. I don't think undefinable is the word. It's indiscriminate or unimaginably small, like almost non-existent, as close to non-existent as a thing can get. 2 dimensions are 2 points like that on a line like that, just as imperceptibly thin. 3 dimensions is another point put above those 2 points that are on the same plane or below it and connected to those 2 points. 4 dimensions. The 4th dimension is duration and how these things change over time. It affects the first 3 dimensions. I don't know that to be true. It affects the 3rd dimension. I know that to be true. And I believe it affects the 2nd dimension because I think energy operates 2-dimensionally. And its source may operate 1-dimensionally, the source of energy. That second thought, the source of energy operating 1-dimensionally, is a brand new thought I never had before. But energy, or sound, operating 2-dimensionally is a theory I've had for a while now. But anyway, I'm sorry I'm getting sidetracked. I was supposed to tell you about the being. I theorize that at the furthest extent of dimensionality, whether it stops at the 4th without free will, or it continues on infinitely out from there due to free will's branching, many almost infinite branching paths, I believe that at whatever the furthest extent of dimensionality is, if there is life there that operates there and can move freely through time the way we move through space, then for one, it would be relatively immortal, which is why I have trouble quantifying it. I don't want to call it a god. I don't want to call it a being or an entity or an energy or a thought or a flaffindoodle or any such shenanigans, but I have to label it some way. So whenever I refer to this abstract thing, that's what I'm referring to. A being that exists in the furthest dimension, in the furthest extent of dimensionality. And I propose that to that being, information would exist everywhere and be readily accessible to it at all times. And given that time, it can move backwards and forwards through time. From our perspective, it would simply know all things. I theorize, yeah, that's it, basically. In broad strokes, I say that at the furthest extent of dimensionality, if something exists there, then it knows all things. And logically, I submit from there that we are the logical outcome of that being trying to rationalize its own existence. That goes to Descartes. I think, therefore I am. If I assume that the being is a life form, similar to us in that it has consciousness and self-awareness and thought, then one of the only things I can assume it would certainly consider, outside of theoretically all things because it's infinite, but that's neither here nor there, the one thing I can almost certainly see it considering, the only way I can try to empathize with it, is that it would want to know about itself. Everything relates everything else to itself. Every living creature relates the world around it to their experiences. I'm going to imagine for a moment that I'm speaking to the omnipresent force, and I'm going to respond as I think it would, as best I can. So I'll try to remain as neutral as possible, because I think that's the best way to go. But I know that's kind of impossible, but I'm going to try for the sake of demonstration. Okay, so my theory, what would I ask about my theory? What would people ask? People would ask what Bender did.
So, do you know what I'm gonna do before I do it?
If there is no free will, then the presence would say yes. Because it will have already, your path is set, and it can see it forwards and backwards, up and down, every way at all times. If we have free will and we are an entity similar to it, just operating on a separate dimension, then the question, do you know what I'm going to do before I do it, would be either yes or no. To explain further, it would be no. I think most likely it would be no, I do not know what you're going to do before you do it. Or I know a little bit about what you're going to do until you get to another point of choice or something, or use your self-awareness in some way, as opposed to the autopilot that we all tend to run on, i.e. cars and working in factories and whatnot, following the same path. Look up the study that says we follow the same paths, and we're creatures of habit. But when we break from that habit, I think that's a moment of choice, and in those moments, if we have free will, then the being does not know what we are going to do. Although, once we make a choice and the universes are created, it knows what the alternatives are doing in alternate universes. You could argue, what if the omnipresent creature could was considered our existence backwards? Figured out the timeline we were on and considered it backwards. Well, if we had free will, that wouldn't really work. But that aside, that doesn't matter, because this is the universe in which it's considering us forward. At one point, it may switch to backward. At one point, gravity might stop. At one point, all these things that we consider rules might change. But for now, these are the rules of our universe, and they will remain as such, it seems. I think we're similar to a program that's being run, or a thought that's being done. Whether we make choices or not, if there is an omnipresent force out there, it could still exist. I think it does. I think it's very, very likely. I think it's almost certain, as a matter of fact. Although I don't think it should be worshipped. That's not the point. Absolutely not the point. Do not worship it. Be aware of it. It's a nice unifying quality to the universe, but do not worship it. Appreciate if you want. I appreciate, but do not engage in worship, because worship begets vanity, begets jealousy, begets violence. So, yeah. What else? Okay, I'm going to hit stop on this one, because and then I'm going to ask more questions if I can think of them. Another question one might be inclined to ask the being, if one could, would be, after assuming free will, after a choice had been made, you would want to ask whether you made the right choice. And the being would not necessarily be able to answer that. Theoretically, you might get an answer. No, the being wouldn't be able to answer that, because it doesn't know your mind. It knows the things that happen, right? It knows the things that happen, and it knows, it's like watching us. But, So what was that question? Oh yeah. It would just know what the alternatives were. Although if you asked, it would say the timelines are spreading out faster than they could possibly ever be explained. It could pick one that it would think that humans as a whole would generally think is good. But I think over time, any decision can lead to any possibility. So if I asked what could have happened if this time last year I held my hands up and clapped 3 times, then the being might say, well, I'm not certain what you mean. There are almost infinite possibilities. There's an inconceivable number of possibilities. However, there is one possibility in which that makes you a rock star. And there is one possibility in which that makes you die instantly. And there is one possibility in which yada, 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 yada. So, inquiring about alternates is somewhat irrelevant. That's why I think what we're doing right now is the one that's being watched. This is the physical. This is the physical representation of the multiple universes. We are the, how to phrase it, authentic first thought. We are the consideration. And any branching path that can be seen, or is known, I should say, by the being as they pass, is like considering alternate possibilities for another type of problem. They're theoreticals. The universe we live in, I believe, although it may sound conceited to say this, I believe is the real one. Although all of my iterations would believe that. Well, half of them would. Half of an almost infinite number would would believe what I believe. And only half of them would believe it in a way that I appreciated, and only half of them would believe it right now, and only half of them would even be able to speak, and only half of them would have eyes. This is getting very theoretical, but it's just considering the possibility of an almost infinite number. Since starting this conversation, if I chose to use any other word, right now, for example, I feel like I'm thrusting myself into a moment of choice, right? Hang on, let me think of... I will either stand up to prove I have free will, or I will remain lying down to prove that I don't. See, now... Oh, boy. Yeah. You see, you understand. Okay. So, at the moment, I'm paralyzed in the decision of it. Because on the one hand, if I stand up right now, I know, at least subconsciously, it'll be partially to prove that I have free will. And if I don't stand up right now, it'll almost be, it could also be the same. Or it could be to prove that I don't have free will. Or I might just do the opposite to spite myself, because I'm very susceptible to reverse psychology. So I'm very much the type to be inclined to lay here and believe that that proves I have free will, because I've chosen to lay here as a symbol of of my free will to not indicate I have free will. You see what I'm doing here? So I'm going to stand up. No, I'm not. Oh, there. See that? That was a moment of choice. I got one. I sat up and then I laid back down. Plus, all of this consideration is leading to a moment of choice, but I just put a little one in the middle there. Okay, so, you know what? I don't know whether or not I should even tell you what I've done. I'm going to stop this recording and make a decision. There. I made a choice. I gave myself a few moments of choice, as a matter of fact, now that I think about it. Now, from my previous recording, I might be inclined to think that the point I'm making is that when you change your mind, you create a point of choice. But that's not necessarily true, although it is much more likely that you create a point of choice in changing your mind than it is by following your path or your first reaction. More important in a moment of choice is considering, taking the time and analyzing from as many angles as you can. Use as many lenses as you can and use your perception and perspective. In some situations, however, you need to just operate. There is a great need for the automatic. It's actually somewhat vital. For example, you can't be analyzing how and why you're driving at all times while you're driving. That's not going to work out for you. That's how you end up in an accident, or you end up afraid to drive for some reason. Well, for that reason. What else would I ask this? What else would somebody want to ask this omnipotent thing? Ideally about my philosophy as opposed to about the universe, because I don't think it would know. It's observing the same way we are, it just has a much larger sample. This presence is a bank of supercomputers compared to our Game Boy Color. Right? So, that being said, it is still observing and learning, in a sense. It can't know everything, is what I mean. To say it's learning suggests that it's taking in knowledge over time, which it is, but time is somewhat immaterial to it. So, to it, by its perspective, it kind of just knows. It perceives all things that can be perceived. So, what questions should I ask about my philosophy? I should ask, what should I do with my life? And it would say, be true to yourself and those around you. Adapt and learn. Grow and help others grow. Pursue positive outcomes for the many over positive outcomes for the few, and avoid negative outcomes wherever possible. Try to live for the moments you're in. Don't consider how long things are going to last or how short things are going to last. Be excellent
to each other. And Audio!
Yeah, I think that's it. Maybe something like that. Okay. I'm gonna hit stop and figure out what I'm doing here. For those of you who are worried about us being a thought, and then what if they just stop thinking? Like that Calvin and Hobbes comic where it's like Calvin's looking in the water and he goes, and Hobbes says, how do you know that's a reflection of you and you're not a reflection of it, and you'll disappear when it walks away. If you have a fear like that, don't. Okay? The being is eternal, and information is fully present to it, fully available to it. That means it's present and exists. That means it has to consider all things eventually on an infinite timeline, which means our thought or universe will not end before its time. That sounds like destiny, but it isn't, I don't think. I still believe in free will somewhat. Although I often stop believing in free will for the sake of trying to understand myself a little better. But excuse me. I lost my train of thought again. I'm starting to lose my coherence. My coherency, or whatever the word is there. So I'm going to stop now. If you are still listening / watching whatever I decide to throw on the screen, thank you so much. This is the heart of my channel. This is the heart of what I wanted it to be when I made it. That doesn't mean spirituality and God and time, and I mean, it does mean all those things, but the fact that this particular video is overly spiritual and talks about I'm sorry, I have a tickle in my throat, and given that even though this video is somewhat spiritual and about things that can't be proven, I intend to dive into an obscene amount of philosophical concepts and anything else that strikes my fancy. If you look through my channel, you'll notice I've got a couple videos that don't seem to line up with each other. Like my quit smoking video, by the way, if you're Canadian and you want to quit smoking and you're under 30 years old, then check that out. You get free patches and gum. And I got some philosophy videos and stuff, but ultimately I want to talk about things like, well, I don't want to tell you, I don't want to tip my hand, but I have tons of philosophy related videos to discuss with you, and tons of jokes that I can't wait to fold in. So if that interests you and you're still listening, man, or woman, sorry, I didn't, man as in the collective, whoever, you knew what I meant. If you're still listening, thank you, and you should like and subscribe. It would really mean a lot to me if you subscribed, especially. I'm sure you know how YouTube works, so I'm not going to tell you, but I have goals. That's all. That's the end. I'm not going to beg you. Thank you so much, and I hope this blends together coherently. And I'll try to do a more structured video on this subject in the future, so subscribe for that in the future, and cheers, boys.